A routine flight turns into a nightmare when turbulence hits, and something falls from the ceiling that changes everything. Follow Emma as she uncovers a deadly plot threatening the skies and races against time to stop a mysterious enemy known only as the Architect. This story will keep you hooked from takeoff to landing. Before we start, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I'm excited to hear from you. Emma Blake pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the crowded terminal at JFK Airport. The February chill still clung to her skin despite the hours indoors. Gate C-28 was buzzing with the usual energy. Passengers standing in huddles, kids slumped over iPads, and the scent of coffee and jet fuel mingling in the air. Flight 732 to Denver, delayed 15 minutes due to weather over the Midwest. Emma glanced at her watch. If the flight left on time now, she'd still make it back to Colorado Springs by late evening. That gave her just enough time to pick up her dog from her neighbors and maybe unwind with a glass of wine before Monday morning. She tucked her boarding pass into the sleeve of her book and waited for her group to be called. Group 4. Always Group 4. When her turn came, she stepped into the jet bridge with a calm sense of routine. Flying wasn't exciting anymore. It was functional. Necessary. As she walked down the narrow tunnel into the plane, she smiled automatically at the flight attendant by the door, who chirped a practiced greeting. "Welcome aboard. Watch your step. We're expecting some bumps once we hit the Rockies." Emma laughed politely and moved past her, noting the familiar drone of overhead bins slamming shut and the rustle of jackets and carry-ons being wedged into small spaces. Her seat was 17A window. She preferred it that way. Watching the clouds pass calmed her nerves. As she made her way down the aisle, she scanned for her row and found it halfway through the rear cabin. A young mother wrestled with a car seat nearby, murmuring apologies as she tried to soothe her baby. A teenage boy, too, rows ahead, was already wearing a sleep mask, earbuds in place. Sliding into her seat, Emma stuffed her bag under the seat in front of her and leaned back. She took out her paperback and prepared for a quiet flight. Just as she got settled, the man who would occupy the aisle seat arrived, tall, maybe early 40s, wearing dark sunglasses despite the dim cabin lighting. He clutched a worn leather notebook and a messenger bag. Without saying a word, he slid into the seat beside her, set the notebook on his tray table, and buckled in. No eye contact. Emma offered a polite nod. He said nothing, just gave a slight nod, barely perceptible, and turned his face toward the aisle. Strange, she thought, but not unheard of. Some people just weren't talkers. Maybe he was one of those who liked to stay in his own bubble. Still, something about his posture struck her. Stiff, almost rehearsed. He didn't seem tense in the usual nervous flyer way. More alert. The aircraft door shut with a thud, and the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 732, nonstop service to Denver International. We're looking at some mild turbulence over the Midwest, but it should be a smooth ride overall. Sit back, relax, and we'll be in the air shortly." Emma turned to look out the window as the engines hummed to life. The plane pulled back from the gate, the lights of the terminal slowly drifting away. Snow flurries caught in the floodlights gave the runway a hazy glow. As they taxied, the man beside her began flipping through his notebook, scribbling something with a pen. His handwriting was small, tight, angular, unreadable from her angle. He caught her glancing and quickly shut the notebook. Emma looked away, cheeks flushing slightly. She wasn't trying to pry. She just had a habit of observing people. Blame it on years of teaching middle schoolers and reading their moods before words ever left their mouths. The plane lifted off with a roar, pressing them gently into their seats. Emma felt that familiar drop in her stomach, that tiny thrill as the city slipped beneath them and gave way to clouds. She sighed and opened her book. Whatever the man beside her was up to didn't concern her. She was just a teacher heading home after a long weekend. But as the aircraft climbed into the clouds and the hum of the engines leveled into a steady drone, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something in this flight wasn't going to go according to plan. Not this time. The plane had been in the air for just under an hour, cruising smoothly above the rolling expanse of Middle America, when Emma Blake finally allowed herself to relax. She flipped another page of her novel, occasionally glancing out the window where a blanket of clouds rolled beneath them like an endless sea of cotton. The man next to her had not said a single word since takeoff. He hadn't even taken off his sunglasses, despite the lack of sunlight. His arms were crossed now, notebook closed on the tray, as he sat rigid and silent like a stone monument. Across the aisle sat a married couple, maybe in their 50s, clearly enjoying their empty nest vacation. The woman, bright and bubbly, leaned over and tapped Emma's arm. "Excuse me, sweetie, what are you reading?" Emma looked up, surprised. "Oh, it's a thriller. One of those twisty ones where everyone has a secret. Just trying to pass the time." The woman chuckled. "Aren't we all?" Her husband chimed in. "As long as no one has any secrets on this flight, I think we're good." They all laughed, except for the man beside Emma. He didn't even twitch. That was the moment Emma really noticed the stillness. Not just quiet. Still. He hadn't moved more than an inch since takeoff. No drink. No snack. No conversation. Not even a glance toward the window. Emma smiled politely and turned back to her book, but her thoughts wandered. She remembered seeing him at the gate, alone, sitting near the corner, hunched over that same notebook. There was something deliberate about him, like someone who was trying to appear ordinary, but didn't quite know how. The flight attendants began rolling the beverage cart down the aisle. The lead attendant, Derek, according to his name tag, had a disarming smile and an easy way with passengers. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" he asked Emma cheerfully. "Just ginger ale, please." "You got it. We're hitting a few patches of rough air ahead, so I'd sip slowly," he said with a wink. She smiled, then turned toward the man beside her. "Sir?" Derek asked. No response. "Sir?" Still nothing. Derek leaned closer. "Would you like something to drink?" The man finally moved just slightly, his head turned. "No," he said flatly. One word. Quiet clipped. Then silence again. Derek gave a small shrug and moved on. As he continued down the aisle, Emma noticed the man shift ever so subtly. His right hand went to his jacket pocket for just a second before returning to rest on his thigh. The motion was too quick to be casual. Her heart gave a slight, involuntary flutter. Maybe she was just letting her imagination run wild. Still, she found herself stealing another glance at him. His jaw was tight, his breathing shallow, and his gaze, though obscured by dark lenses, seemed focused not on the seat back in front of him, but on the overhead bins. She looked up. Nothing unusual. The luggage compartments were shut and latched. Everything looked normal, but he kept looking, as if he were waiting for something to happen. Outside, the clouds thickened. The captain's voice came on overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting some light turbulence for the next 20 minutes. Please keep your seatbelts fastened and remain seated unless necessary." The usual message. Nothing alarming. But something about the tone, casual yet slightly forced, added a layer of tension that Emma couldn't explain. She shifted in her seat, trying to focus on her book again, but the words had lost their pull. Her ears attuned to every little sound, the rattle of a cup, the squeak of shoes on the carpeted aisle, the hum of the engines. And then she heard something else. Not loud, but distinct. A soft metallic creak from directly above them. The overhead bin above, row 17. Her eyes flicked up instinctively. It was shut, but the man beside her suddenly straightened, as if he'd heard it too. His fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. Emma's heart skipped. That's when she knew. This wasn't just her imagination. Something wasn't right with this flight. And the man beside her? He wasn't just another quiet traveler. He was watching something. Waiting. And whatever it was up there. The first jolt hit like a punch to the chest. The aircraft bucked sharply, sending a startled murmur through the cabin. A few overhead bins clicked from a sudden force, but none opened. Emma's ginger ale sloshed over the edge of her plastic cup and onto her jeans. She gasped and grabbed a napkin, dabbing at the spill, but the turbulence didn't stop. A second, sharper jolt followed, causing the plane to dip violently. A child screamed somewhere near the front. The lights flickered. The captain's voice came over the intercom, louder now. "Flight crew, take your seats. We are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Everyone, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The flight attendants moved quickly, securing carts, locking galley doors, strapping themselves into jump seats. The cabin buzzed with whispers and nervous laughter, passengers trying to mask their unease. Emma clutched the armrests. She hated turbulence, always had, but this felt worse than usual. She turned to the man beside her. He sat stiffly, body upright, his fingers white-knuckled around the edges of his seat. His eyes, still hidden behind those dark sunglasses, were fixed upward. That's what happened. A loud metallic crack shattered the cabin's tense silence. Above them, in the center of the aisle near row 17, a panel in the ceiling jolted loose and dropped open. Something heavy and dark slipped out from the compartment and fell hard to the floor with a thud. For a moment, no one moved. The object lay still on the carpet, wrapped in black cloth, about the size of a toolbox. It hadn't come from an overhead bin, but from a concealed panel above the main ceiling, the kind housing maintenance systems and wiring. Emma's breath caught. A flight attendant, a younger woman with red hair tied tightly back, unbuckled and rushed toward the object. Passengers craned their necks. A few people near the object leaned away, clearly uneasy. The attendant crouched and examined it cautiously. She touched her earpiece and murmured something, likely to the cockpit. Then she reached out, hands gloved, and picked it up. Her movements were careful, too careful, Emma thought. Whatever it was heavy and delicate. The cloth covering it slipped slightly, revealing a glint of metallic hardware underneath. Thin wires peeked through the folds. Emma's blood ran cold. The man beside her shifted suddenly. His hand slid into his jacket again, but this time it stayed there. His whole body was tense, like a spring about to snap. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as the flight attendant stood, cradling the object in her arms like it might explode, and quickly made her way to the rear galley. She disappeared behind the curtain. Another attendant closed it behind her. No one said anything. No announcement. No explanation. The captain didn't come back on the intercom. The object had clearly not been meant to fall out, and no one seemed to want to talk about it. The man beside Emma leaned slightly closer to the aisle, listening as if waiting for a signal. Emma turned her head toward him, her voice barely a whisper. What was that? He didn't look at her, didn't even acknowledge the question. He simply reached up and pressed the call button above them. The small light blinked to life. Seconds later, Derek, the lead flight attendant, appeared, his expression unreadable. Yes, sir. The man didn't speak. He reached into his coat slowly, pulled out a small badge, one Emma couldn't make out fully, and flashed it for less than a second. Derek's demeanor changed instantly. He gave the man a tight nod, then turned and walked swiftly toward the back of the plane. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Something was unraveling, and it had nothing to do with turbulence. Her mind screamed for answers, but her instincts told her to stay quiet, to watch, and to stay alert, because that object hadn't just fallen, it had revealed something that wasn't supposed to be seen. Emma sat frozen, her pulse thudding in her ears as the seconds ticked by. The curtain at the rear of the aircraft swayed slightly, and beyond it, muted voices rose and fell, tense, hurried. Whatever that black-wrapped object had been, it wasn't just some misplaced piece of equipment. And the way the flight crew had reacted contained urgency wrapped in forced calm, confirmed it. This wasn't routine. Beside her, the man with the sunglasses hadn't moved since flashing his badge. His call light still blinked above, ignored now, its glow seeming to cast a spotlight on the tension in the row. Emma risked a glance at his face. Still stone-like, still unreadable, but his fingers were no longer clenched. They drummed softly against the armrest, a steady, rhythmic beat. Not nervousness, calculation. From the front of the cabin, Derek reappeared. His smile was gone. He walked swiftly past them toward the rear, but Emma caught the tightness in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned every passenger like he was counting something or someone. A moment later, the red-haired attendant parted the curtain and stepped into the aisle, holding the black bundle. This time, it was secured in a hard plastic case, the kind you'd expect to see storing sensitive electronics or maybe hazardous material. Her face was pale. She passed it to Derek without a word. He turned and carried it back up the aisle. Emma tracked the case with her eyes. Several passengers followed it too, whispering. The hum of unease was building like pressure in a sealed container. "What do you think it is?" asked the older woman across the aisle. Her voice was hushed. "Maybe something fell from a maintenance hatch," her husband offered, though he didn't sound convinced. Emma forced a small nod. "Could be." But inside, her thoughts raced. Wires. Metal. The way it had been wrapped in black cloth. Not something any airline would casually store above a cabin. She turned to the man next to her. "You work for the government?" she asked quietly. He didn't respond. She waited, then added, "You flashed a badge." "I saw it." Finally, his head tilted slightly toward her. "You didn't see anything," he said, calm and cold. "Don't involve yourself." His voice was low, commanding. Not a threat, but a warning. Emma bristled, but she held her tongue. There was a sharp crackle on the overhead speaker, and the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a mechanical anomaly, but everything is under control. There is no cause for alarm. We will continue our flight to Denver and keep you updated as needed. Thank you for your cooperation." A mechanical anomaly? Emma scoffed silently. That wasn't mechanical. That was human. And the more she replayed the moment, the more convinced she became that someone had hidden that device in the ceiling. Someone who hadn't planned for it to fall. Suddenly, a young man from the middle rows stood up. He wore a hoodie, his face obscured by his hair. He walked quickly toward the rear, pretending to stretch. A flight attendant tried to stop him gently, but he brushed past her with a mumbled excuse. Emma watched as he slipped behind the curtain. A minute passed, then 2, then 3. No return, no noise. She looked back at the man beside her. His jaw was tight again. "He shouldn't be back there," Emma whispered. He didn't answer, but his hand slid once more inside his coat. Then came a sound that silenced the entire cabin. A shout, muffled but sharp, followed by a single loud bang. Not an explosion, but something heavy hitting the galley floor. Panic flared in Emma's chest. Gasps rippled through the rows. Derek burst through the curtain seconds later, face flushed, gripping a small radio in one hand. He sprinted up the aisle, not stopping to reassure anyone. A baby started crying. Passengers turned in their seats. Someone called out, "What's going on?" No answer. The tension, already taut, now throbbed with fear. Emma gripped the armrests. Her eyes darted to the man beside her. He'd removed his sunglasses. For the first time, she saw his eyes, sharp gray, unwavering. "Stay seated," he said. Then he stood up and moved toward the back of the plane. And Emma, against every voice in her head telling her not to, unbuckled her seatbelt and followed. Emma's feet moved almost of their own will as she followed the man in sunglasses, now removed, revealing those alert gray eyes, toward the rear of the aircraft. Passengers murmured behind her, some rising halfway out of their seats, others watching with growing concern, but no one dared follow. As she neared the curtain, the hum of the engines seemed to quiet, drowned out by the rush of her own heartbeat. She hesitated for a split second before parting the curtain and stepping into the galley. The first thing she saw was the young man in the hoodie, now seated on a folding metal stool, his head bowed, hand behind his back. Derek stood in the corner, arms crossed, tension radiating from his posture. Beside him, the red-haired attendant clutched the hard plastic case to her chest like it was a newborn. And standing directly in front of the hooded man was the stranger from 17A, his presence sharp, electric, unmistakably authoritative. "You don't belong back here," he said coldly, voice low but lethal. The young man said nothing. His eyes darted nervously toward Emma, then down again. The agent, because that's what Emma was certain he was now, pulled a small, flat device from his pocket and pressed it against the man's chest. A red light blinked, followed by a faint beep. He glanced at the screen, then back at the man. "No weapons," he muttered, almost to himself. "But no ID. No name on the manifest, either. Why are you on this plane?" The man's lips parted slightly. I missed my connection in Chicago. They moved me to this flight last minute." "No," the agent said, eyes narrowing. You're not even showing up in the flight database. He stepped closer. Why were you trying to access the cargo hold from the galley floor panel? The young man's eyes widened. I wasn't. I just wanted to see what that thing was. I saw the flight attendant take it. You thought what? The agent snapped. That you just sneak back here and poke around a potentially dangerous object midair? Emma stepped forward, voice cautious. Wait, maybe he's telling the truth. He seemed scared, not trained or armed. The agent turned his eyes toward her briefly, annoyed. Stay out of this. But Emma stood her ground. He might have made a dumb move, but what if he's just a kid who panicked? Doesn't explain what that thing is, or why you're here with a badge, and zero explanation. The agent's jaw tightened. Derek finally spoke up. She's right. Our crew's in the dark. This is our plane. We should know what we're dealing with. For a long moment, silence hung in the air like smoke. Then the agent exhaled sharply. Fine. You want answers? He turned to face both Emma and Derek. That object, what fell from the ceiling, is a component from a classified surveillance package that should have never been on a commercial aircraft. Someone placed it there, intentionally, not maintenance, not the airline. It was hidden behind a false panel above the cabin. Emma's breath caught. A surveillance package? Like recording us. Worse, he said. It wasn't just recording. It was transmitting. Live. The young man in the hoodie looked up sharply. I didn't put it there. I swear. Then why did you try to access the floor panel? The agent asked. You were heading to a secondary access point. You knew where to look. No, he said, voice cracking. I saw the wires when I went to the restroom earlier. Something looked off. Emma stared at him, trying to read the truth in his face. He looked terrified, but not deceitful. The agent studied him for a long beat, then muttered something into a radio clipped to his belt. We're running out of time, he said. If that signal was live, someone knows it was found. This plane may not land quietly. Emma's heart sank. You think there's more on board? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned to Derek. Get every flight attendant you trust. We searched the entire cabin. Quietly. No panic. We can't let passengers know yet. Then he looked at Emma. And you're already involved. Stay close. If something happens, I might need backup. Emma swallowed hard. Backup? I'm not trained for this. He gave a grim smile. Neither were most heroes. Emma followed the agent back through the curtain into the main cabin, her mind still reeling from what she'd just heard. A surveillance device hidden in the ceiling, transmitting live from a commercial flight? It sounded like something out of spy thriller, but the tension in the agent's voice had been all too real. The cabin, surprisingly, had quieted down. The earlier turbulence had passed, and most passengers were settled again, some trying to sleep, others nervously watching the aisle. But the calm was deceptive. The man in 17A, whom Emma still didn't know by name, turned to Derek and said, We need your team. Discreet. Every crew member you trust. Derek gave a tight nod and disappeared down the aisle. Emma leaned closer to the agent. You said there might be more on board. Do you mean more surveillance devices? Possibly, he said without looking at her. Or worse, if the people who planted it realize we've found one, they may have built-in contingencies. Contingencies? She echoed, alarm rising in her throat. Like explosives? Let's hope not. That was all he said. A moment later, the red-haired flight attendant returned with two others, one tall and older, the other younger with wide eyes. Derek motioned for them to follow, and they formed a small circle in the galley. The agent pulled out a printed schematic of the aircraft, folded and marked with red circles and arrows. We'll break the cabin into sectors, he said quietly. Start with overhead bins, then seat panels, lavatories, underfloor storage, if accessible. Focus on areas that aren't passenger accessible, but could conceal devices. If you see anything out of place, extra wires, new hardware, adhesive residue, report it. Don't touch it. He turned to Emma. You stay with me. What am I supposed to do? She asked. Observe. Sometimes fresh eyes catch what trained ones miss. Together, they moved toward the midsection of the aircraft. The agent opened an overhead bin above row 18 and immediately began inspecting the top panel with a penlight. He reached up and pressed gently along the corners, then slid a fingertip beneath the edge. It clicked. A false panel lifted slightly, just enough to reveal a gap. Inside, hidden behind insulation foam, was another small black box, smaller than the first, with a single blinking green light. "Found one," he muttered. Emma's eyes widened. "That was above my seat." "Exactly. They placed them in areas where passengers wouldn't think twice, where they'd be easy to miss." He pulled out a sealed plastic pouch from his coat and placed the device inside carefully. "We're going to need the whole plane." Over the next 15 minutes, the search team worked fast and quiet. One of the attendants found a thin antenna wire running behind a mirror in the front lavatory. Another uncovered a tampered access panel under a row of seats near the back, where the carpet had been lifted and resealed. In total, they uncovered 4 more suspicious items, each cleverly hidden, each transmitting some form of signal. "Whoever did this," Derek said quietly, "they knew this aircraft well. This wasn't random. It was mapped, planned, and executed over time." The agent nodded grimly. "This isn't surveillance. It's intelligence gathering, possibly targeting someone on board, or testing the system for something bigger." "Shouldn't we land immediately?" Emma asked. "We can't just keep flying with this going on." "We've already requested priority descent into Denver," the agent replied. "But we need to know what we're dealing with before we land. If we panic the cabin, we risk more than fear. If this is a trial run for something worse, they might have someone on board monitoring us." Emma felt a cold wave settle over her. "You think there's another operative on this flight?" "We found the eyes," he said darkly. "Now we need to find the ears and the hands." Suddenly, a soft ding echoed overhead. The fastened seatbelt sign lit up again, and the captain's voice came on, strained but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Denver shortly. Please return to your seats and ensure your belts are fastened." Emma looked at the agent. "What now?" He gave her a look that made her stomach drop. "Now we find out who's watching us before they make their move." As the plane began its gradual descent into Denver, the cabin lights dimmed slightly and a new kind of tension settled over the passengers. It wasn't the fear of turbulence anymore. It was something quieter but sharper, like everyone was subconsciously holding their breath. Emma followed close behind the agent, who moved with precise intention. He didn't glance around nervously like someone paranoid. He scanned like someone trained to hunt. As they moved past row 10, the agent slowed. 9C, he muttered, almost to himself. Emma looked at the man in the aisle seat, who appeared to be in his early 50s, dressed in a dark gray zip-up jacket and jeans, a paperback novel clutched in one hand. His expression was oddly calm. Not frightened, not curious, just still. "What about him?" Emma whispered. The agent leaned closer, voice barely audible. "His ticket was purchased an hour before departure using a prepaid debit card. No loyalty number, no baggage, no ID match on any travel watch list. But facial recognition software pinged a partial match to a known alias used by a freelance surveillance tech who went off-grid 2 years ago. European background, multiple languages, history of small-scale infiltration ops." Emma blinked. "You ran facial recognition on all the passengers?" "On some," he said. His match wasn't strong enough to flag to the airline, but in context, he trailed off, nodding at the seatback screen in front of 9C. Unlike every other passenger, whose screens either showed the in-flight map or entertainment, his screen was dark, powered off. But the faintest glow bled from the edges. "That monitor should be off," the agent said under his breath. "Unless he's accessing something he shouldn't." He stepped forward and crouched beside the man's seat. "Sir," he said with a forced politeness, "mind if I ask you a few questions?" The man in 9C slowly looked down, setting his paperback on the tray table. His eyes were sharp, gray-blue, and assessing. "About what?" he asked with a slight accent. "Something unplaceable." "Routine passenger feedback," the agent replied, standing straight now, his tone deliberately casual. "You've been on this route before?" "First time," the man said. "Why?" "Just curious," the agent said. "Where are you headed in Denver?" "Business," the man replied. "Tech conference." "Which one?" There was a long pause, and Emma could see the subtle shift in the man's eyes, the flicker of hesitation. Not sure of the name, he finally said. My company booked it. Which company? The agent asked, smiling faintly now. Maybe I've heard of it. You probably haven't. The man leaned back in his seat, a faint smirk on his lips. The agent nodded once, then stepped away. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the flight. He took Emma by the elbow and led her back 2 rows. He's lying, she whispered. Definitely. His accent slipped once. I think he's Eastern European, and he's using the seatback monitor to either access the plane's internal systems or intercept transmissions from the devices we found. Can he do that? Emma asked. If he's who I think he is, yes. And if he knows we're on to him, we don't know what he's capable of. The captain's voice came over the speaker again. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Emma looked out the window. The lights of Denver were glowing beneath them, but they still had at least 15 minutes before touchdown. We need to contain him, she said. Can't we restrain him now? The agent shook his head. If we move too early, he might trigger something. We need to be sure he doesn't suspect we're about to act. When we land, we'll have federal agents on the tarmac. Until then, we keep him isolated, watched, and absolutely calm. Emma looked forward again at 9C. The man had picked his book back up but wasn't reading. His eyes, just barely, were flicking toward the galley. Watching, waiting, and as the plane began its final descent, Emma realized they weren't just trying to reach the ground. They were trying to land without lighting the fuse of something far more dangerous. The lights inside the cabin flickered once as the aircraft dipped lower through a patch of cloud cover, Denver's twinkling grid of streets growing larger beneath them. Emma gripped the armrest, not out of fear of flying. She never had that, but because something felt wrong. The air pressure shifted unnaturally, her ears popping, and just as she looked toward the cockpit door, a sharp jolt knocked her forward in her seat. Oxygen masks didn't drop, but gasps erupted throughout the cabin. The plane had dipped hard. It wasn't turbulence. It was something else. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, but this time it wasn't calm. Flight crew, take your seats immediately. No additional explanation. That tone, tight-clipped and shaken, sent a ripple of panic down the rows. Emma twisted in her seat to find the agent striding quickly, but without drawing attention. He crouched beside Derek, who was now back in the forward galley. Talk to me, he muttered. Derek looked pale. We just lost automatic pressurization control for a second, and altitude readings flickered. Could be sensor interference, but it might have been deliberate. Something's feeding false data to the avionics. Could 9C do that from his seat? Emma asked, leaning in. You need an onboard relay, the agent replied. If one of those devices was wired to internal controls, and he has a way to trigger it from his screen, his words trailed off. We need to shut him down. Now, without triggering him, Derek asked. We can't risk him locking in a signal or activating something worse. The agent opened a slim black case he'd retrieved from his seat, a signal disruptor. This'll fry his connection for about 20 feet. If he's uplinking anything from that seat, this will break it. He handed it to Emma. You'll need to walk past him, drop it in the magazine pocket of the seat across the aisle, 10D, and act like it's nothing. Emma froze. What? Why me? He's already watching me, the agent said. If I go near him now, it'll spook him. But you. He saw you involved earlier, but he doesn't think you're a threat. Great, she muttered, her palms sweating. I'm not. Exactly, he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Which is why this will work. Heart thudding against her ribs, Emma took the sleek black device and stood. The agent slipped behind her casually, walking in the opposite direction to draw attention. As Emma passed row 9, she felt 9CS eyes land on her like heat from a furnace. She forced a yawn, made a show of stretching her arms, and paused beside the magazine rack of row 10. With as natural a movement as she could manage, she tucked the device into the pouch and slid a crumpled airline napkin over it. Then she turned and kept walking, heart hammering as if she'd just sprinted a mile. Behind her, the agent tapped his earpiece. It's working. Signal disruption confirmed. He's looking down. He knows something's wrong. Emma sat back down and gripped the armrests. So now what? We watch him, the agent said. He's going to make a move. He's not transmitting anymore. That was likely his primary job. Now he's exposed. and desperate. As if on cue, 9C slowly reached beneath his seat. Not to grab a bag, not to retrieve a phone. His fingers curled around something hidden, something previously unseen. The agent's eyes widened as he muttered, "He is something else. Something we missed." Just then, the plane shuddered again, not dropping this time, but climbing. Abruptly, against flight protocol, passengers shouted in confusion as gravity shifted and drinks spilled. The captain's voice came on again, this time distorted and urgent. "Brace. Everyone brace." Emma turned toward the cockpit. What the hell is happening? The agent rose, his jaw tight. He's overriding our descent. Somehow, he's interfering with flight controls. We're not landing anymore. He's trying to take the plane back up. Emma's blood ran cold. What? The agent met her eyes. Because someone's waiting below, and he doesn't want us to meet them. The sudden climb was unmistakable now. The nose of the aircraft tilted just slightly enough that passengers began to panic, their murmurs growing louder, sharper, like a rising tide of fear. Emma clutched the armrest, her stomach turning with the ascent, and the agent beside her was already tapping into a small black tablet he'd produced from his coat. "We're receiving something," he muttered. "A signal." He switched frequencies. "You mean he's still transmitting?" Emma asked, leaning in. "We disrupted his link." "Not the main one," the agent said. "But he's using a backup channel, likely from whatever he just pulled out under the seat. A hidden transmitter, maybe something piggybacking off the aircraft's own systems." Derek's voice crackled in through the agent's earpiece. "I'm in the avionics panel. We've got a data surge on internal comms. Something is hijacking the signal routing. I think he's broadcasting live." "To who?" Emma asked. "And what is he sending?" The agent didn't answer right away. He pressed a few commands into the tablet and patched into a decrypted audio feed. What played made Emma's blood run cold. A voice, not 9CS, but another male, calm and clipped, was speaking in a language she didn't understand. It wasn't English, Spanish, or anything she could place. But the tone was unmistakably formal, like a report being delivered to someone of authority. "He's been transmitting the interior of the cabin," the agent said grimly. "Not just audio. The camera we found? That wasn't the only one. He's got at least one more hidden feed. He's sending it in real time, likely from that device under his seat. They're watching us. They've been watching us this whole flight." Emma stared at him, chilled. But why? What were they looking for? The agent's eyes met hers. Maybe a target. Maybe a test. Maybe both. He stood abruptly and moved toward 9C, who was now visibly agitated. The man's hand was still beneath his seat, gripping whatever device he'd revealed. His eyes were scanning the cabin now, not just casually, but calculating, measuring who knew and who didn't. The agent stopped a row short of him. "Sir," he said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "I'm going to need you to remove your hand from under the seat." 9C didn't move. "You're interfering with federal operations," the agent said, his tone now cold and commanding. "This aircraft is under surveillance, and you're currently transmitting unauthorized data. Remove your hand and step into the aisle." 9C smiled, small, grim, and humorless. "I don't think so," he said, and for the first time, Emma heard the unmistakable trace of a Slavic accent, buried deep but present. The agent didn't flinch. "You've got 5 seconds." "Or what?" 9C asked, and before the agent could answer, he pressed something under the seat. The entire cabin jolted, not from turbulence, but from within. Overhead lights blinked and dimmed, and the PA system let out a sharp electronic squeal. From somewhere in the ceiling, a low-pitched static began to hum. Every screen on the back of every seat flickered to life simultaneously, displaying nothing but a blank field of white text over black background. The message read, "You're not in control." Gasps erupted across the cabin. Some passengers cried out. Others just stared, frozen. Emma's heart pounded as she turned to the agent. "What is this?" "A demonstration," he muttered. "He's proving that whoever he's working for, wherever they are, they can hijack any system, even midair. This is a test run for something bigger." Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the text disappeared. The The screens blinked out again. The lights returned to normal. And 9C? He calmly raised both hands and stood, smiling. You may detain me now, he said. The message has been delivered. The agent stepped forward and snapped a zip tie around his wrist with swift efficiency, forcing him to his knees. Who are you working for? You'll never find them, 9C said softly. They're already inside. Emma didn't know what chilled her more. The words, or the fact that 9C looked completely at peace, as if he'd just completed a mission no one could stop. The plane's wheels touched down on the runway with a harsh screech that echoed through the cabin. Passengers instinctively braced against the seat backs, their faces a mix of relief and lingering tension. Emma's heart hammered in her chest, not from the landing, but from the knowledge that the threat wasn't over. The man in 9C sat quietly, wrists bound, a faint smirk playing on his lips as federal agents moved swiftly down the aisle to take him into custody. The agent who had been working alongside Emma whispered into his radio, confirming the secure arrest as the aircraft taxied to the gate. Outside, emergency vehicles flanked the plane, their lights flashing a steady red and blue warning. Emma watched through the window as uniformed officers surrounded the jet, their movements sharp and precise. Inside the cabin, murmurs began to spread, passengers exchanging anxious glances and tentative questions. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, we have safely landed. Please remain seated until instructed to disembark. We appreciate your cooperation. Emma exhaled slowly, scanning the cabin for signs of ongoing trouble. The screens remained blank, the system silent. Derek, still at the front galley, gave her a brief nod, indicating that the plane's controls had been fully restored. But the unease lingered like a shadow. The agent who had coordinated the arrest approached Emma quietly. You did good, he said. We couldn't have contained this without you. She nodded, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Who was he really? We believe he was part of an espionage ring, trying to gather sensitive data from a tech summit here in Denver. His devices were more advanced than anything we'd seen before. The fact he could hijack the plane's systems mid-flight means this was more than a simple intelligence operation. Emma felt the weight of that revelation settle deep inside her. And the broadcast? She asked. Still tracing it, he replied. But it came from somewhere in Eastern Europe. No surprise there. Whoever he was working for wanted to send a message. And they succeeded. The cabin door opened, and passengers began to rise, some still shaken, others relieved to be on solid ground. Emma stood slowly, her legs numb from hours of tension. She stepped off the plane with the agent following closely. Outside, the cool Denver air was a sharp contrast to the stifling cabin atmosphere. Reporters and cameras crowded the tarmac, flashing lights and shouting questions. The federal team ushered Emma and the agent away from the chaos. We'll need your statement, one officer said. Emma nodded, knowing this was only the beginning. As she glanced back at the plane, she saw the now empty cabin through the windows. The ordinary facade hid secrets that could have brought disaster. But for now, the crisis was over. Emma felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. She realized that the plane had not just survived turbulence or a rogue passenger. It had weathered a test of human resilience and technology's fragility. As she walked toward the waiting ambulance that would take her to the debriefing, Emma caught a final glimpse of the night sky. Somewhere out there, the people behind the operation were already planning their next move. But tonight she had stopped them, and that was enough. The fluorescent lights of the federal office buzzed softly as Emma settled into the hardback chair, her wrists still aching from the hours cramped in the plane. The agent who had guided her through the ordeal sat opposite, sliding a file across the table. Inside were photos, flight logs, and intercepted communications, proof of the complex web they had just unraveled. It's worse than we thought, he began, voice low. That man, call him Subject 9C for now, wasn't acting alone. He was part of a coordinated effort to penetrate multiple high-value targets during the tech conference. And this flight was only the first phase. Emma's eyes scanned the documents. Maps showing satellite tracking, encrypted transmissions, even a manifest of similar operatives. How do they get such advanced tech on board? She asked. We still don't have all the answers, but the devices were disguised as everyday electronics. The kind of gear that's almost indistinguishable from consumer models. The agent leaned back, rubbing his temples. This was a test run, a trial to see how far they could push their control over aviation systems and communications. The message on the screens was a warning. They're telling us they can infiltrate anything. Emma felt a chill. What about the target on the ground? Still unknown, the agent admitted. The tech conference was a perfect cover for exchanging intelligence. We suspect the real goal was to extract information from an undercover operative embedded among the attendees. Someone who might not even realize they're compromised. Emma's mind raced. So, the whole flight was a setup to get the package here? Exactly. And almost worked. The door creaked open and Derek stepped in, holding a tablet. We managed to trace some of the transmissions, he said. The backup broadcast was routed through a server farm in Eastern Europe, but it was masked through multiple VPNs. Whoever is behind this is highly skilled and well-funded. The agent nodded grimly. Which means we're dealing with a sophisticated espionage network, one with global reach. Emma stared at the tablet screen, filled with lines of code and shifting IP addresses. What happens now? She asked quietly. We continue to monitor and investigate, the agent said. But we also need to strengthen aviation cybersecurity protocols. If they can hijack a plane's systems mid-flight, we're all vulnerable. Emma felt a sudden surge of resolve. Then I want to help, she said. I want to be part of the team stopping this. The agent studied her for a moment before nodding. You've already proven your worth. This is far from over. Outside, the city lights of Denver flickered against the night sky, oblivious to the invisible battles being fought in its shadows. Emma realized that the world she thought she knew was shifting beneath her feet. Technology, connection, and trust all had become weapons and battlegrounds. And she was standing right at the front line. As the office door closed behind Derek, Emma took a deep breath and stared out the window. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. But tonight, she could finally rest, knowing she had made a difference. For now, the days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, security briefings, and sleepless nights. Emma found herself thrust deeper into a world she never imagined she'd be part of, a shadow war fought with invisible weapons and hidden signals. The Federal Task Force moved quickly, tightening protocols on airport security and working with airlines to audit their onboard systems. But even as they patched vulnerabilities, new threats emerged. One evening, as Emma sat reviewing encrypted files in a dimly lit conference room, her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. We're not finished. Watch the skies. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. She shared the message with the agent, who frowned. Looks like whoever orchestrated the 9C operation is signaling they're still active. That night, Emma barely slept. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing. The aviation world, once stable and predictable, now felt like a fragile bubble, ready to burst at any moment. The next morning brought news of a disrupted drone flight near Chicago, a suspicious device intercepted before it could cause damage. The pattern was clear. Attacks were no longer limited to people. Technology itself had become the battleground. At the task force headquarters, Emma sat at a large table surrounded by analysts, pilots, and cybersecurity experts. They discussed countermeasures, shared intelligence, and strategized ways to stay ahead of an enemy they could barely see. We need proactive defense, one analyst said. Predict their moves before they happen. Emma raised her hand, her voice steady despite the tension. What if we could use their own technology against them? Infiltrate their network before they strike again. The room fell silent for a moment. Then the lead agent nodded thoughtfully. That's a bold plan, but might be our best shot. Over the next days, Emma worked alongside a team of hackers and specialists, learning to navigate the dark web and trace digital footprints that vanished like smoke. Each lead brought them closer to a hidden command center, likely located overseas. One evening, while poring over logs, Emma found a pattern, a series of signals tied to certain flight paths, all leading back to a shadowy figure codenamed the Architect. The name sent chills through her. This was no mere operative. This was a mastermind, orchestrating attacks with precision and cold calculation. As the pieces fell into place, Emma realized that the events on her flight were just the beginning. The true battle was about to unfold. But she was ready. She had seen the enemy's face, felt their reach, and understood the stakes. And with the task force behind her, she would fight to keep the skies and the world safe from those who sought to control it. Outside the window, the Denver skyline shimmered, a beacon of hope amid growing uncertainty. Emma sat back, determination blazing in her eyes. The war was far from over, but so was her resolve. Emma's fingers trembled as she stared at the screen, the code name, the Architect, glowing ominously in bright white letters on the encrypted chat logs. It was a digital ghost, a phantom puppet master pulling strings from somewhere deep in the shadows. The task force had been chasing leads for weeks, but this was the first solid thread to unravel the tangled web of conspiracies behind the recent attacks. The Architect wasn't just a hacker or an agent. He was a strategist with a vision, a man who saw the skies not as a realm of freedom, but as a chessboard to be controlled. As Emma leaned into her work, the room around her seemed to fade away. Analysts buzzed around, voices overlapping in a cacophony of jargon. But she focused solely on the code, piecing together fragments of data that hinted at his identity. Somewhere in the encrypted chatter, she found references to a location, a safe house in rural Virginia. The coordinates were vague, but enough to mobilize a field team. The agent who had been her guide since the flight leaned in, whispering, "This is it. If we move fast, we might catch him before he disappears again." The plan was risky. The safe house was fortified, equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance and defense systems, a fortress designed for a ghost. Emma volunteered to accompany the tactical unit. She felt it was her fight, her responsibility. As the convoy sped down winding back roads under the cover of darkness, tension mounted. Every mile brought them closer to the man who had turned their lives upside down. When they arrived, the safe house loomed like a monolith against the night sky, surrounded by dense woods and high fences. The team moved silently, breaching the perimeter with precision. Inside, they found a command center filled with monitors streaming live feeds, dozens of screens showing planes in flight, airport terminals, and encrypted communications. Emma's breath caught as she realized how deeply the Architect had embedded himself into the aviation network. But the room was empty. No sign of their target. On a central console, a single message flickered: "You're closer than you think." It was a taunt, a reminder that this mastermind was always one step ahead. Suddenly, alarms blared. The team scrambled to defensive positions as drones, small, swift, and armed, buzzed through windows and vents. A fierce battle erupted in the cramped space. Emma ducked behind a console, heart pounding, as the sound of gunfire and the whir of drones filled the air. The Architect wasn't just a hacker. He was a fighter willing to protect his empire at any cost. When the chaos finally subsided, the safe house was silent once more. The drones were down, but the Architect had vanished, leaving only a trail of encrypted clues hinting at his next move. As the team regrouped outside, Emma's mind raced. They had come so close, yet the true enemy remained elusive. But now, she understood the stakes more clearly than ever. This was not just a game of technology or espionage. It was a battle for control of the skies themselves. And she was determined to win. With dawn breaking over the Virginia hills, Emma knew the chase was far from over. The Architect's shadow loomed large, but so did her resolve to bring him to justice. The war was entering a new phase, and she was ready to face it head-on. The clock ticked relentlessly as Emma stared at the map projected onto the screen, a web of red lines tracing flight paths, satellite signals, and intercepted communications. The Architect's movements were becoming clearer, a calculated pattern revealing a planned attack on multiple major airports simultaneously. Denver, Chicago, New York, no city would be spared. The task force scrambled to coordinate with federal agencies nationwide, sharing intel and mobilizing resources. Emma's phone buzzed again. Another cryptic message, this time with coordinates and a countdown timer blinking ominously. The final phase was imminent. The team worked around the clock, analyzing data and preparing defenses, but the tension was palpable. Every beep from a monitor, every alert from an agent, felt like a countdown to disaster. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time, chasing a ghost who always seemed a step ahead. On the morning of the planned attack, the task force convened in a secure operations room deep underground. Screens lined the walls, showing live feeds from airports and air traffic control centers. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of fear and determination. Emma stood among analysts and pilots, her eyes scanning every detail. Suddenly, alarms blared, multiple unauthorized access attempts detected in the networks of key airports. The architect was launching his assault. Security teams scrambled to isolate affected systems, while pilots grounded flights to prevent chaos. But the architect's plan wasn't just technical. It was psychological. False alarms, conflicting signals, and misinformation spread rapidly, sowing confusion among operators and passengers alike. Emma watched helplessly as the first waves of drones took to the skies, buzzing towards sensitive airspace. But this time the task force was ready. Electronic countermeasures disrupted the drone's control signals, sending many crashing harmlessly to the ground. Yet, a few slipped through, forcing rapid response teams to intercept. Hours passed in a blur of activity, tension mounting as the team fought to regain control. At one point, the countdown timer on Emma's phone reached 0. The architect's final message appeared. Control is an illusion. Emma clenched her fists. They had prevented disaster, but the cost was high. Hundreds of flights delayed, thousands of passengers stranded, and a clear message sent. The architect's reach was vast and his threat real. As the dust settled, the task force regrouped, exhausted but resolute. Emma realized that this battle was only the beginning. The skies were safer today, but tomorrow could bring new dangers. And as long as the architect remained at large, no one could feel truly secure. Outside, the city's skyline shimmered under the setting sun, a fragile beacon of hope in uncertain times. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenges ahead. The final countdown wasn't over. It had just begun. The weeks after the thwarted attack were tense and unforgiving. Emma found herself buried in endless intelligence reports, late-night strategy meetings, and a growing weight of responsibility. But beneath the pressure, a breakthrough emerged. A subtle error in the architect's communications, a recurring phrase, a slip in the encryption, gave the task force a fresh lead. They traced it to a safe house in a small town near Baltimore, a place that had slipped past surveillance during the first raid. Emma volunteered immediately to join the rapid response team. The operation was delicate. They needed to strike quickly before the architect vanished again. Under the cover of darkness, helicopters circled low, and tactical units moved in silent formation. Emma's heart pounded as they breached the perimeter, every step heavy with anticipation. Inside, they found an array of advanced equipment, computers, servers, and communication devices humming with intercepted data streams. But this time the architect was caught off guard. Emerging from a hidden room, he was unarmed but defiant, his cold gaze meeting Emma's with unsettling calm. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "This is only the beginning." Despite his bravado, the architect was handcuffed and led away by agents, his network dismantled piece by piece. Emma watched him go, a mix of triumph and wariness swirling within her. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The architect's capture unraveled many threads, his operatives scattered, communications severed, and his schemes exposed. But in debriefings, Emma realized that his reach extended deeper than they'd feared. Corrupt officials, sleeper agents, and shadowy financiers. The architect's influence was woven through layers of secrecy. As she pored over the evidence, Emma's resolve hardened. Protecting the skies meant more than stopping one man. It meant dismantling an entire network of threats, lurking beneath the surface. Yet, amid the chaos, moments of quiet emerged. Emma found solace in the small victories. A grateful message from a passenger she'd helped, a successful security upgrade on a major airline system. Each step forward was a reminder of why she fought. One evening, alone in her apartment, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the turbulence on that fateful flight to the complex web of espionage and danger. She knew challenges awaited, but also understood her own strength and purpose. The skies would always be vulnerable, but so would the people determined to protect them. And Emma was ready to stand at that front line, whatever came next. As the city lights flickered outside, a new dawn approached, not just for the aviation world, but for the promise of safety, vigilance, and hope. The architect was captured, but the story was far from over. For Emma, it was just the beginning of a lifelong fight to keep the skies free and secure. The morning sun cast a warm golden light across Denver's skyline, bathing the city in hope and renewal. For Emma, this dawn marked more than just the start of a new day. It symbolized the fragile but precious peace they had fought so hard to secure. The capture of the architect had sent shockwaves through the intelligence community, unraveling a vast network of cyber espionage and covert threats that stretched across continents. Yet, even as celebrations quietly unfolded in government offices, Emma knew the work was far from over. She walked through the bustling terminal of Denver International Airport, watching travelers move with renewed confidence, unaware of the invisible battles waged to protect their journeys. The screens above displayed flight statuses, blinking reassuringly green. Her phone buzzed with messages from the task force, updates on security enhancements, reports of suspicious activity now thoroughly investigated and neutralized. Emma felt a quiet pride swell within her. They had made the skies safer. Yet, she also felt the weight of vigilance, the understanding that peace required constant watchfulness. The architect's arrest was a victory, but his vision of control had planted seeds that could sprout again if left unchecked. Sitting down in a quiet corner of the airport cafe, Emma pulled out a small notebook, jotting down ideas and improvements born from the hard lessons of recent months. Innovations in drone detection, stronger encryption protocols, international cooperation, all were essential steps forward. She knew that technology was a double-edged sword. It could be weaponized or harnessed for protection. As she sipped her coffee, a familiar figure approached. Agent Carter, her mentor and ally through the chaos. "You look tired," he said with a wry smile. "You earned it." Emma laughed softly. "I guess I have, but I'm ready for whatever comes next." They talked about the future, plans for new task forces, education programs for airline staff, and public awareness campaigns about cybersecurity. The conversation was hopeful, grounded in reality, but infused with determination. Outside, planes soared into the clear blue sky, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Emma watched one climb higher, disappearing into the horizon, and thought about the countless journeys ahead, flights filled with families, business travelers, dreamers, and adventurers. Their safety depended on the unseen guardians like her and the team she'd become a part of. Rising from her seat, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle for the skies was ongoing, a dynamic struggle between innovation and intrusion, between freedom and control. But today, she chose to embrace hope and courage. With every flight that took off safely, with every threat identified and neutralized, the future grew a little brighter. Emma stepped outside into the warm sunlight, breathing deeply, ready to face whatever challenges awaited. The plane that had once been a stage for chaos was now a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even amid turbulence, humanity could rise above. As the city hummed with life around her, Emma smiled quietly. The skies were free once more, and she was ready to protect them, come what may. Thank you so much for joining me on this thrilling journey through turbulence, secrets, and courage high above the clouds. Emma's story reminds us that even in the face of unseen dangers, resilience and determination can light the way forward. If you enjoyed this story, Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions and what you'd like to see next. Your support means the world and helps bring more exciting tales right to you. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes on the skies.